What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I want to get into the ring career of Ezzard Mac Charles, better known as Cincinnati Cobra. Now, he was born July 7th, 1921 in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Now, Georgia would be the state of the late great, pound for pound, welterweight and middleweight champion of all times, Walker Smith, better known as Sugar Ray Robinson. And 1921 would also be the year of the birth of Sugar Ray Robinson. So you see, Ezzard Charles and Ray Robinson would come from the same school. Now, unfortunately, Ezzard Charles would die May 28, 1975 in Chicago, Illinois. But Chicago, Illinois would be the city and state that Ezzard Charles would win the inner city Chicago Golden Gloves. Now, Ezzard Charles would stand 6 feet and have a 73-inch reach, have total bouts of 121, 95 wins, 52 knockouts, 15 losses with 1 draw. Now, he would win a heavyweight championship strap September 27, 1950 from the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis, in New York. Now, Joe Louis would be heavyweight champion in 1937, and he would knock out James Braddock in 8 rounds to hold the heavyweight championship strap. And he would hold that title from 1937 to 1949. He was a phenomenal champion, phenomenal fighter. It was Joe Louis. Now, Joe Louis would retire before the Ezzard Charles fight, and he would accept that challenge because he felt as though he owed Uncle Sam, as they call it, the IRS, interest in his taxes that were not paid from 1941-1942. You see, Joe Louis had fought for the Army and Navy Relief, and he donated his entire purse. He fought Abe Simon and Buddy Bear, and donated his entire purse to the Army and the Relief Fund and the Navy Relief Fund. And although he donated those purses, but the checks were written out to him. So the media was running of interest that would accumulate on the checks that were written out to Joe Louis. Now, you would think that the military would step in and take care of those interest rates for Joe Louis. But they used Joe Louis for what they could, unfortunately for Joe Louis. And it caused Joe Louis to make comebacks when he didn't have to. And while he was in the military, he would borrow money from Mike Jacobs. And Mike Jacobs would keep tabs and interest on the money that he borrowed Joe Louis. So Joe Louis was in all kinds of debt. So on September 27, 1950, Ezzard Charles would be the next candidate for Joe Louis. Now, Ezzard Charles would already hold the heavyweight championship strap, the NBA version. But he had to solidify that championship in order to be considered the lineal heavyweight champion. So after defeating Joe Walcott on June 22nd, 1949, he would have to go up and face Joe Louis to solidify his championship. And after 15 action-packed rounds, Joe Louis was a step slower than Ezzard Charles, and Ezzard Charles would become the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. Now, Ezzard Charles did not want to face Joe Louis. That was his idol. But they kept telling him he was not the world champion. He was not the lineal champion. And the only way he could become the lineal champion, he would have to fight the man and defeat the man who beat the man, and that would be Joe Louis. And Joe Louis defeated James Braddock, and that was the lineal line at that point. Joe Louis had the title for 11 years at that point. He was actually champion 11 and a half years, and Charles wanted that title. So they would get it on September 27th, 1950. And Joe Louis would take a pretty bad beating, although he controlled the action at times. but he was just a step slower. He came out of retirement, and in his prime, Ezzard Charles wouldn't have had a chance, although Ezzard Charles, in my opinion, could have been the greatest light heavyweight champion of all times, and had he stayed in the division, the greatest middleweight champion of all times. Had he been given an opportunity at the title at that time, because you have to remember that at that time, black fighters didn't get opportunities to fight for titles. So this was a monumental achievement by Ezzard Charles. And it would be the first time that an African-American fighter would take a title from another African-American fighter. This was rewarding. Now, an African-American writer for the magazine called Color, by the name of Sanders Alex Mason. He was a very good author, and he wrote a piece in the column, Why Joe Louis Should Retire. I'm not going to read the entire article to you. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to skim through this, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention. A very interesting article, if you can ever get your hands on it. And he has valid points. Now, this is the magazine. It's called The Color. It's mostly sold in the African American communities. And Joe Louis was on the cover with Joe Walcott. And the reason why the article was written was because of this fight with Joe Walcott in 1948. Joe Louis was dropped by Joe Walcott. In fact, he was dropped twice in this fight. Now, Joe Louis has been down in 1939 against Tony Galento, 1936 against Max Schmeling. He was down in 1937 against James Braddock. But he was down twice in this fight. And the mechanics of Joe Louis was not quite the same. He didn't look his old self. And many people were very concerned about Joe Louis. And Alex Sanders Mason, very good writer, Sanders Alex Mason, was a young boy when Joe Louis was fighting in 1935. And to watch him throughout his career slowly diminish was very upsetting to him, to the point where he had to write an article. And here you have Joe Louis with his family, Jackie and Joe Jr., and Marva Travis. He was on the cover of Ebony magazine. June 1949. The beating that Joe Louis would suffer after the Ezzard Charles fight was quite concerning to many. Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, many others were very concerned for Joe Louis. And he wanted to get into his finances to see where he went wrong, and if there was any way they can help him. Now, in this issue of Our World magazine, June 1948, it goes into quite details after what was going on with Joe Louis. And I can tell you, after reading those articles, very sad. Meanwhile, Joe Walcott would be in line to face Ezzard Charles for the Heavyweight Championship strap There were many efforts to try and get Joe Louis out of an agreement to face a young up-and-coming Rocky Marciano, because Joe Louis was in desperate need at this point. He was threatened that he would do jail time and he would dishonor his country. But the IRS would have none of it and state that Joe Louis must pay his taxes. Joe Louis was a well-dressed man. And he was a symbol to his community. And he felt that if he didn't take care of his business, he would let his community down. So Joe Louis, after the second fight, was Jersey Joe Walcott. And he would win his title with honor, because he basically lost his title before the 10th round knockout of Jersey Joe. And this time he felt he would retire for good. But as I stated, 1950, he would make a comeback to face Ezzard Charles. And he would suffer a beating for it and lose his lineal honors to the Heavyweight Championship strap. July 18, 1951, Jersey Joe Walcott will pull off one of the biggest upsets in boxing history. At the age of 37, he would become the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. Beautiful 7th round knockout. One of the greatest left hooks in the business. Jersey Joe would become the brand new heavyweight champion of the world by knocking out Ezzard Charles in the 7th round in 1951. Now, if 1951 would be some year, to this day, in boxing history, it's the year that championship belts were swapped and turned over by all weight divisions. Yet Ike Williams would be knocked out by Jimmy Carter and lose his lineal lightweight championship. Jake LaMotta would be knocked out in 13 rounds by Sugar Ray Robinson. Ray Robinson would lose to Randy Turpin in England the middleweight championship belt, and then he would regain it at the Polo Grounds. Joe Louis would be knocked out in the 8th round of Madison Square Garden by Rocky Marciano. Now, Joe Louis or Marciano was not the champion at that time, but the fight was the caliber of a championship fight. Joe Brown would defeat fast-rising Tommy Campbell. Willie Peck and Sandy Sadler would change titles. It was a phenomenal year, 1951. Now, Joe Louis would sign the fight Rocky Marciano, 1951, at Madison Square Garden. Jim Norris is there to witness the agreement. The Brockton blockbuster, Rocky Marciano, had defeated Joe Louis, and now is in line to face Jersey Joe Walcott for the Heavyweight Championship of the world. Rocky Marciano and Joe Louis are a sad moment in Madison Square Garden. Ezzard Charles defeats Joe Louis in 1950 and becomes the brand new lineal heavyweight champion. Now, with the victory of Joe Walcott over Ezzard Charles and the victory of Rocky Marciano over Joe Louis, meant that Marciano would now face Jersey Joe Walcott, and that fight was scheduled for 1952. Ezzard Charles takes the final count as he stumbles over and loses his long-awaiting heavyweight championship belt. You see, Ezzard Charles turned professional in 1940. In 1937, 1938, he was an outstanding amateur. He would win the welterweight championship in the Golden Gloves. He would win the Nationals. He would win the AAU. He would win a diamond belt in the middleweight division. He would have a fighting record of 42-0. Very high knockout percentage. He started as a featherweight in his amateur days. Worked his way all the way up fighting fighters such as Charlie Burley, Rex Lane, Pat Valentino, Oakland Billy Smith, unfortunate death of Sammy Baruti, 1948, Joe Baskey, Frank Buford, Elmer Ray, Archie Moore, the Old Mongoose, Lloyd Marshall, Tony Zelf, he was a middleweight champion. Anton Foley, Christopher Foley, he was a light heavyweight champion. Charlie Norcus, a heavyweight, had wars with Danny Nardico, one of the greatest fights of all time. Johnny Holman twice, Rocky Marciano twice, Ken Overland, who had a very good fight with Severino Garcia. He would fight Ken over on 2 different occasions, win one and lose one. Kid Tornado, Charlie Burley twice, Booker Beckworth, Jose Basura, Moses Brown, Joey Maxim 5 times. Joey Maxim would become the light heavyweight championship title holder, and he would lose that belt to Archie Moore in 1952. Jimmy Bivens twice. Tommy Hurricane Jackson, Gus Lesnovich, who would become the light heavyweight champion. Joe Louis, Brown Bomber, 11-and-a-half-year champion, 1937 and 1949. Jersey Joe Walcott wound up becoming a heavyweight champion by knocking out Ezzard Charles in the second fight. First fight, he would lose to Ezzard Charles and lose an opportunity to hold the NBA heavyweight championship strap. So Ezzard Charles had worked his way up, and he would lose it with a blinding left hook of Jersey Joe Walcott. We have Ezzard Charles featured in a cartoon edition in Ring Magazine, 1949. The Brown Bomber, How to Box by Joe Louis. I've learned so much in this How to Box series of Joe Louis. It was a 2-book series. I have both of them. And I gotta tell you, Joe Louis is one of the greatest punchers of all times. What I've learned, and what Jack Blackburn had taught him, is a thing to behold. Kill a body and the head to die. You can run, but you can't hide. Rocky Marciano, the Brockton blockbuster, would be placed on Ring Magazine 1951, November edition, for his accomplishments. Rocky Marciano, contender for World Heavyweight Championship. Here's Rocky Marciano at Stillman's Gym, preparing for the Jersey Joe Walcott bout, scheduled for 1952. Now, in the April edition of Boxing and Wrestling, they would promote the fight. And this was the fight the world has been waiting for. Joe Walcott and Rocky Marciano. And Rocky Marciano would grant the wish of the majority of America with his knockout of Joe Walcott. September 23rd, 1952. I'll tell you that Marciano and Joe Walcott bout was a classic. And now Rocky Marciano would become a heavyweight champion of the world. And in 1954, he would face Ezzard Charles, the Cincinnati Cobra. So Ezzard Charles and Rocky Marciano would get it on June 17th, 1954. Ezzard Charles was placed on a cover of Ebony magazine, April 1950. Dynamic fighter was Ezzard Charles. I have Ezzard Charles, my top 10 greatest fighters of all times. Ezzard Charles, his lovely wife, featured on the cover of Ebony magazine, October 1951, the year that he would knock out, or be knocked out, by Jersey Joe Walcott. Charles would suffer a terrible beating by Rocky Marciano, June 17, 1954. But Marciano would have his nose split in half. In the rematch, September 17, 1954, he would knock out Ezzard Charles. Ezzard Charles would continue with his career with fights over Pat Valentino and a few others, Nino Valdez. But he would not be the same. But it doesn't take away the fact that he was the greatest fighter at light heavyweight and middleweight in many eyes. Salute to Ezzard Charles. So Ezzard Charles, one of the greatest fighters of all times, and I just wanted to salute him. Thanks for hanging in there with me. This is Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, stating all great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Ezzard Charles is a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest fighters, would have no problems today. He was in there with the best of his time, began his career as featherweight, and ended it as heavyweight champion of the world. Not many can accomplish what Ezzard Charles has accomplished, and let's keep in mind the time he came around in 1937 through 1952 to 1954. Segregation was at its highest. Black fighter didn't get opportunities, but yet he hung around, and he was the best at his time. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Salute to all my subscribers. Salute to this great legendary fighter, Ezzard Charles.